would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, namely the Yugambeh tribe, the Kaurna tribe, and all other First Nations peoples, namely elders past, present, and emerging. Yatala. Though it is famous for its Yatala pie shop, that is not how it inherited its name. Arthur Dixon, a white man, purchased the land after arriving here from South Australia and named it after his previous homeland. The term Yatala originally comes from the First Nations people's word Yatala, which is defined as swampy, or water running by the side of the river, which inherently came from the Kaurna tribe of South Australia. For the last 15 years, this place has been my home. It is also where my knowledge of the First Nations people grew. My family and I are Anglo-Australians, and as such, much of the history that I have been taught and the identity I see in the First Nations peoples has come from a colonial perspective. The culture of Australia is one that is hard to define. This nation is very multicultural, and as descendants continue to pass on history and tradition, values and beliefs can get lost. One thing that was lost for a time was the recognition of the original owners. Since recognition of the First Nations peoples has increased, individuals are more aware and sensitive to the history and traditional custodian values of this land. Yatala is a highly developed industrial area with trucks constantly on the road. The land is shaped by man-made machinery to suit the needs of those in the business industry. Not once did I see recognition of any social justice for the First Nations peoples. Not once did I see the sacred land be valued and appreciated as the traditional owners would have done. However, there is a school that runs by the Albert River called Rivermount College, where one of the original founders, Neville Boona, was of the First Nations peoples. This college recognizes and sustains the acknowledgement of country before every assembly and promotes First Nations peoples' history and awareness. They strive to eliminate any cultural alienation, racism, or negative social attitudes, and encourage coexistence of a harmonious nature. They offer scholarships for those with First Nation peoples' heritage as a helping hand to assist with the intergenerational trauma that has befallen so many of the First Nations peoples. This college flies their flags and offers a great opportunity of self-determination for the First Nations peoples. My own high school experience was very multicultural. However, an acknowledgement of country of the traditional owners was not performed once at any meeting or assembly, limiting my own experience to engage with the First Nations people's way of life. Within the tribal lands, there is a language, history, and research centre called the Yugambeh Museum. In all the years that I have lived in the Yugambeh area, the centre has never caught my eye. It hides behind its own back walls and has no obvious sign for passbyers to see. No art decorates the buildings and no flags fly. This makes me question why there is no easily identifiable aspects of the First Nations people at a historical place like a museum. Though the very existence of the museum shows social justice, it is not enough to have the locals recognise it. With so little recognition given, it makes me question if the human rights of the First Nations peoples are actually followed through with. Are the First Nations people given the opportunity to practice their culture? Are there microsystems, mesosystems, and macrosystems within their ecological systems working in harmony? Are the First Nations people surviving as a culture and a way of life? With all these systems and aspects of personality that every person in the world has, it creates a percentage of every individual's intersectionality. However, with failures to recognize the First Nations peoples, failures to appreciate their culture, enforced policies that prevent certain aspects of culture to be practiced, past faults and intergenerational trauma, First Nations peoples must struggle to identify their intersectionality. This reminds me of the privilege that I have experienced in my life and leads to my own white grief. Even attempting to liken the First Nations people's life experiences to my own is a struggle. That helps me see more clearly the blessings and privileges I have lived, and how much social injustice the First Nations people receive.